The moment Eleanor Whitmore parked her car in front of the pale blue colonial house in Greenwich, Connecticut, my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. Because I had stood on that exact sidewalk 10 years earlier watching movers carry my life out of that same front door. And Eleanor had absolutely no idea. The house sat quietly behind a row of trimmed hedges and towering oak trees. The same brass mailbox still hung beside the driveway. The same white porch swing still creaked softly in the breeze. And suddenly, every memory I had buried came rushing back like a tide that had been waiting years to return. Eleanor smiled nervously as she turned off the engine. Her fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel. "I'm excited for you to finally meet them," she said softly. I forced a small smile, even though my stomach felt like it had dropped somewhere far beneath the pavement. "How long have they lived here?" I asked carefully. "Forever," she replied with a small laugh. "Since before I was born." The words landed heavier than she realized. I stared at the front door. The same door where my mother once stood, crying, while signing foreclosure documents. 10 years ago, this house had belonged to my family, and now it belonged to hers. I didn't say anything as we walked up the stone path. My footsteps felt strangely slow, like the ground itself was resisting me. Eleanor reached for my hand. "You're quiet," she said. "Just nervous," I replied. That part at least was true, but not for the reason she thought. The door opened before we could knock. A tall man with silver hair and calm eyes greeted us with a warm smile. "Eleanor," he said, pulling her into a quick hug. Then he turned toward me. "And you must be Daniel." His handshake was firm and confident. "Arthur Whitmore," he said. The name alone carried a certain weight. Arthur Whitmore was a known figure in Greenwich investment circles, a man whose real estate acquisitions were often discussed in quiet business lunches across town. His wife appeared moments later. Graceful posture, elegant navy dress, the kind of composure that suggested she had spent decades hosting rooms full of important people. "Margaret Whitmore," she said warmly. Her eyes studied me for half a second longer than most people would notice. "Please come in." The moment I stepped inside the house, my lungs felt tight. The floorboards still made the same soft creaking sound. The chandelier above the foyer was identical. Even the faint scent of cedar from the old coat closet lingered in the air. But everything else had changed. The walls were freshly painted. The furniture was modern. The house had been transformed into something far more polished than the life my family once lived here. Still, certain details refused to disappear. The staircase curve, the window above the landing, the small dent in the wooden railing where my younger brother once crashed his toy car during a birthday party. "Daniel," Eleanor whispered beside me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly, just taking it all in. Arthur gestured toward the living room. "We've heard quite a bit about you," he said casually. That sentence carried the subtle pressure of evaluation. Eleanor squeezed my arm proudly. "Daniel runs a consulting firm in Manhattan," she told them. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive." Margaret poured wine with quiet precision. Conversation flowed easily at first. Career paths, travel stories, small talk about Greenwich traffic and Manhattan rent prices. But my attention kept drifting around the room. I noticed the spot where my father once placed a Christmas tree every December. The corner where my mother used to read late at night after everyone else had gone to bed. The fireplace mantel had been redesigned, but the stone foundation underneath was the same. Every detail felt like a ghost speaking directly to me. Arthur eventually leaned back in his chair. "So, Daniel," he said calmly, "how did you and Eleanor meet?" "At a charity event in Manhattan," I replied. Eleanor smiled softly. "He helped me find the exit when I got lost looking for the coat check." Arthur chuckled politely. Sometimes the best things start by accident. But Margaret had grown quiet. Her eyes moved slowly across my face again. There was something in her expression that made my pulse quicken. Recognition, but not certainty. Not yet. Dinner moved to the dining room. The long oak table was new, but the window behind it was not. That window used to face the backyard where my brother and I built a crooked treehouse one summer. The treehouse was gone now, but the large maple tree still stood tall outside the glass. I looked away quickly. "Daniel," Arthur said after a moment, "you seem familiar to me." The room went quiet. Eleanor glanced between us curiously. What do you mean? She asked. Arthur, study me more closely now. You didn't grow up in Greenwich, did you? My throat felt dry. Actually, I said slowly. I did. Margaret's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Where exactly? She asked. I paused for a long moment. Then I gestured lightly toward the floor beneath us. Here, I said quietly. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Eleanor blinked in confusion. What? This house, I explained carefully. My family lived here until about 10 years ago. Arthur leaned forward slightly. Your last name? Daniel Carter Whitfield. The moment the name left my mouth, Margaret's expression changed completely. Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. Arthur exhaled slowly. Whitfield, he repeated. Yes, I said. Eleanor stared at me like she had just heard a language she didn't understand. You never told me that. I didn't think it mattered, I said gently. Arthur sat back in his chair. Well, he said quietly, that explains it. Before we go further, pause for a moment and tell me something in the comments. If you discovered that the house your partner grew up in was now owned by your own parents, would that change how you see the relationship? Or would it simply feel like coincidence? Because for Arthur Whitmore, it clearly wasn't coincidence. We purchased this property during a foreclosure auction, Arthur said calmly. Yes, I replied. I know. Eleanor looked between us. Wait, she said slowly. You mean my parents bought your family's house? Yes. The emotional weight of the moment filled the room. But Arthur didn't look defensive. He looked thoughtful. Real estate markets can be brutal, he said quietly. My father used to say the same thing, I replied. Margaret finally spoke again. I remember that sale, she said softly. The Whitfield family moved quickly afterward. Yes, I said. New Haven. Eleanor looked shaken now. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because the house isn't the story, I said. The people inside it are. Arthur nodded slowly. A subtle shift had happened at that moment. The tension in the room changed from awkwardness to something deeper. Recognition. Respect. Two families connected by the same place, but separated by very different outcomes. Daniel, Arthur said after a moment. I hope you don't feel uncomfortable here. I looked around the room again. The memories were still there, but they no longer felt like wounds. Actually, I said honestly, it feels strange, but not uncomfortable. Margaret smiled gently. Houses carry history, she said, but history doesn't always belong to the house forever. Eleanor reached for my hand beneath the table, and for the first time that night, the weight in my chest finally eased, because the past had walked into the room, but it hadn't come to stay.